Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Collegiate Esports Experience. What is now our 8th episode, but the second time recording this episode. As Tanner and multiple people in the space say, it wouldn't be esports without something breaking or something going wrong. And we are fortunate again to have another great guest joining the podcast this early on in the podcast. We have Professor Karen Ruggles of DeSales University joining us, someone who we met, not quite formally, but met and engaged with at the NACE conference, and certainly knew that we wanted to have you on at some point in the podcast, so we're very fortunate to have you on today. Tanner, how are we feeling? What do we got going
Phenomenal.
on? You've had a lot going on recently,
Absolutely.
so finally being able to sit down.
Signings, playoffs, you name it. Regents is doing phenomenal, so pretty happy with that, but enough about me. Professor, I'll let you take it away. The space is yours.
Oh, wonderful. I'm happy to be here with you guys. Thank you so much for asking me on. I can introduce myself a little bit here. So Professor Karen Ruggles, I teach at DeSales University. That's in Center Valley, Pennsylvania. So we're sort of triangulated between Philadelphia and New York City. So we're about an hour out from each one of those metro hubs, which is nice in terms of the Northeast and the esports scene. It's pretty dense over here, which can be good and bad, but I see it as a positive for sure. I've been teaching for about 10 years now. I'm an associate professor of computer science, and my specialty is 3D animation. And I've been serving my university as well as the Varsity Esports program director for 6 years. We play League of Legends, Overwatch, Valorant. We have a burgeoning chess scene, which I'm very excited about. And, it's really just for me, it's to kind of cultivate this space to produce structure and, facilitate positive gameplay, which I'm really excited to be a part of that. It does get tough, but the students definitely make it worth it. On the esports side as well, I do sit, as you sort of alluded to with the NACE convention, I do sit on the board of directors for NACE. I also serve on the board for Voice, and I also serve the RSAA out of Riot as their on their advisory board.
Oh, how do you have time to do all that? That's quite the
I don't.
extensive process.
There it is, right? I always feel bad. I'm like, yeah, I'm doing all right. I'm productive. And then I hear some other people go through what they're doing. And I'm like, dude, have another coffee and get back to work, man. You're not there yet, Well,
it's not a competition.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the intro, and again, from being here. I know I personally was incredibly excited for this episode because I myself kind of walk that balance between esports and higher education teaching and things like that. And so just out of curiosity, I'm more curious on, your career as a whole. Was your goal to be teaching in higher education? Was that kind of the first and foremost thing? Or how did you kind of end up where you're at today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love the origin stories. So for me, teaching has always been something, I guess I found out that my passion is helping other people find their passion, as sort of cheesy as that sounds.
I love it.
So teaching very much hit a lot of the sort of bonus points for me. It's something I'm very good at, but I also have this touch point with students at what I think is a really beautiful time in a person's life, whether they choose to go on to pursue higher education in the sort of formal 4-year program, or they don't. I speak to a lot of prospective students, and some of them, it's not the right choice for them to pursue the 4-year education. And there is a lot of external pressure for students to go to college or, seek this degree. And you can be very successful and very happy without doing that. So for me, it's just trying to, and this, I think also bleeds into what, how I got involved with esports, is to create this ecosystem that students feel safe so that they can talk about what they really are interested in. And then for me to say, it's okay, go pursue the thing that makes you you. And that's really, for esports, I've always been a gamer, from, I don't know, 5 years old, when I was holding the book to tell my brother to turn right instead of left, and the all of the cheat codes and all of that we would kind of ping off of each other. And so it just sort of feels natural. So when my university was looking to add esports, we also in the computer science department, we have a game programming track underneath the computer science major. So I, teach students how to model things that could go into a game, some of those principles and everything that's needed for that game art field. So they very naturally sunk up with me and said, "Hey, you game," it's sort of, I think, a lot of us, if you take a look at the sort of 6-year plus crowd of people who got involved with esports at the collegiate level, a lot of it is that, esports, right? And it sort of grew from there. So I've found a lot of success in my own right within my arena, to build a space that I'm proud of. And, we typically talk about the competition. Obviously, we got to be competitive, and pushing the students on competition, learning the game, ranking up, et cetera. But also being a part of our community, whether that's the esports community or the college university as a whole. But also, connecting with each other and connecting with their future. So, if you're going to be here and not see what your future is going to look like, I don't want you here. Like we want to be really helping students become their best selves. And that's something that culturally speaking, I think is really pivotal in a lot of spaces.
Definitely. I love that you brought that up, because that's a big mission for me as well. I mean, I tell my students all the time, I don't really care if we're winning or losing. I want you guys to have a good experience. I want you guys to be making strides in your personal development and stuff like that. So I'm really glad that you highlighted that.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing that I say to my students all the time is, you have to be able to win gracefully, just like lose gracefully. So that idea of good sportsmanship, and, sometimes the ref or whatever it is, whoever calls the shot, they get it wrong. But that's the game. You know what I mean? Like I watch baseball pretty frequently with my husband, and like you can very clearly see that the guy was out or something. But that was not the call that was made. You just have to kind of take it on the chin and say that's part of the game and move on. So having those students learn those lessons, because that translates directly into whatever they're going to go into in the future, whether it's interpersonal relationships, their work culture, even just examining their own selves to say, oh gosh, this isn't the way it's supposed to be, but I got to learn to live with that.
Yep.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm kind of curious on, so your timeline, right? I'm paying attention to kind of the experience that you just gave us. Were you at DeSales prior to the esports program being founded?
Correct.
So then did they turn to you? Like, did you kind of get brought into that? Were you a pretty pivotal part, like where they were saying, I think you briefly alluded to it, but they were like, hey, I think this is kind of your avenue. What do we do? And what were some of those questions that were asked to you, or things that were asked of you, when starting and kind of implementing that program?
Yeah, in the early days, right? It was, I grew up gaming, but I wasn't super involved in watching, professional esports, or, I have 2 young kids, so I wasn't really inundated with the gaming culture as it is in the contemporary space. So, of course, I heard about it, I knew about it sort of peripherally, but I wasn't like living, breathing esports. So in that regard, I was probably not like the best choice if you look at, the population at large, but definitely within the DeSales ecosystem, you can have done better. So, part of those early conversations were something as basic as like, what do the computer specs need to be in order for these games to run well? And how big should the desks be so that students can actually play and, be successful as they're flicking their mouse everywhere. Yeah. So sort of that day-to-day, like gamer life, I think is what I brought to that table. But, I worked very closely to build out our arena and, in terms of how many seats should be next to each other, because you have like League playing 5 and Overwatch playing 6, at the time. So, so there was a lot of this knowledge that I could sink into, whereas other people around the table who were doing their best, right? But many people were like, well, the last game I played was like Pong or something, like it was something very, very like Atari. And
still a great
me
game,
too,
by the way.
me too.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it just, they were trying to put the best people around the table to accomplish that. I will say one of the things that came up that I don't think we've successfully approached as a collegiate scene is, the representation of women within games. So very often, and we're a Catholic university at DeSales University. So how women are represented within games, they're often very scantily clad. They're saying sexually suggestive things or, something along those lines. There's a lot of violence. So those types of conversations of, well, what does this mean for us and for our identity if we're saying that this is the game that we want, students to play and we're encouraging people to play. And I get that across the board. I get that from, prospective student parents. I get that from outsiders. I get that from my brother, like there's lots of different areas that you get the question of, is this the best choice for us to recreationally engage and support at the collegiate level?
I never thought about that.
I've never thought about that.
That's a whole new perspective.
We were just talking about that last week on the podcast where I was like, there's always one thing that like we end up discussing with somebody each week that I'm like, I've never even considered that. And I don't think I've considered that in any way. Like I've considered the representation of people, right?
Sure.
Like diversity, like we talked about that before we started recording. But I don't think I've ever thought of the image that could be portrayed within the content and games through which we sponsor, which is a really...
Well, and I think that's like that exact point is important to me because a lot of times you might not even think about it, but and like same thing as being a woman, like you just don't, that's the way it is, or you're watching a show and you have like the smart kid has glasses. Right.
Yeah,
and it's just like these tropes that have been kind of played on us that we just assume. And that assumption is not good, at the end of the day, because it's making this underlying culture of, well, this is what women are, or this is what a man is, or this, whatever, like fill in the blank, you know what I mean? Or this is acceptable language or something like that. And I think that a lot of times that feeds the toxicity that we see in some of these games is because we, it's already at that undertone and no one's there to be like, that's not cool, and say like, hey, we don't want that in this game, because at the end of the day, it sells, right? It's a game that is an IP that needs to make money and produce, a revenue stream.
Right.
And it's not, it's not soccer. Right. It doesn't like exist solely really in the collegiate scene. Like some of the other traditional field sports do. I mean, they do have a professional scene as well, but esports exists very well without college.
Right.
But it is becoming a stronger arm. And I think that part of that stronger arm can produce some structure that will see some of these negative aspects that, like you said, I never really thought about that. But when I do think about it, that's not who I am. That's not what I want to be. And I think it's those types of things that run under the radar that we just need to kind of shine a light on and say, is this really what we want to do, guys?
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. That's awesome. I'm going to watch this over a couple times after. That's awesome. I kind of keeping tabs with that conversation in kind of this general ballpark of a topic. We obviously know with diversity and things like that, right? Esports and the video game scene has been for quite some time heavily male, right? And as we've grown and things like that, it's certainly starting to balance out, and rightfully so. But there's obviously still a lot of work to do. But whether or not, I want to make that distinction in that diversity and inclusion aren't the same thing, right? And so while we can focus, right, and so while we can focus on, oh yeah, our program is 50-50, or we were 25% female last year, now we're 35, we're making the right steps. That's great, 100%. However, do they still feel included once they're at on the team or at the table, right? I teach management and leadership, and so diversity, equity, and inclusion is a very huge part of some of the curriculum of my courses. And I tell them, diversity is having the people at the party. Inclusion is saying, do you want to come dance, right? Like, do you want to be involved here? So what, have you found yourself intentionally trying to make sure that inclusion is a priority for you and in your program, or just in the esports industry, and how have you done that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of the engagements that I do, I end up speaking about DEI initiatives. It's something just personally in my my I guess professional career, even though I guess this is still a professional side. But in my more like academic training side, I'm involved with DEI initiatives for the VFX industry, because that one also is very white male. And there's, because it is very technical, if you take a look at computer science majors, I will say that DeSales University computer science, we do have a more diverse than I think the national average, which is really wonderful. And I think part of that has to do with the representation of the faculty. So at DeSales, the computer science faculty is predominantly women. And we had an open line for a faculty member, and a white man applied. And I was like, he is the diverse candidate when you think about who is making up this department, which was really an interesting moment for me, because I think at the end of the day, we say this word diversity, right? And mostly our mind goes to race, it goes to gender identity, it goes to sexual orientation,
right?
It goes to kind of, some of these areas that we hear a lot about. There's visibility there, that we see it happening at our institution, or at our church, or at our whatever your outlet is, wherever your community is, and we see that sort of playing out. One thing that I think esports in general, that I get very passionate about, could do better with as well, from the traditional diversity, equity, inclusion, is socioeconomic status. And I think it's also one of the areas where this is why colleges have added esports to their university, because typically the student who is gaming has the computer at home because they are at that master's level, right? And you don't get that computer at home if you don't have any cash. Yeah. So who are we leaving out of this room just by default? And you can see that with other traditional field sports as well. Some of these, like, it's very costly to have an ice rink, right? So if you have an ice hockey team, who is going to be filling that roster? Or the physicality of that. So I think there are some other areas, neurodiversity, physical limitations or differences. There's a lot of spaces that esports can embrace, because you can be a wheelchair user and be awesome at esports, and that's true in a lot of other sectors as well. But that space, I feel like, doesn't get as much attention as some of the other ones that are more like universal across the board.
I actually had that conversation with our new DEI officer here at Rockford, one of his first weeks here. In Rockford, we have a lot of boys and girls club, and a lot of them are expanding into esports. And we have a pretty good partnership with them. We actually have a recruit from the Boys and Girls Club. But I wanted to be more available in the community, and I wanted to see or hear his ideas about it, and figure out how I don't know how to phrase it correctly, but esports, like you said, is so expensive. You need a nice PC, and PCs are getting more and more expensive. And I wanted to hear his ideas on how I could reach a community that doesn't always have access to these PCs. And he actually had some good ideas that him and I are going to work on this summer, like a summer camp and stuff like that for lower income families.
Yeah, to me, that's one of the beautiful things about having esports as an offering on your campus. We certainly have to be mindful of kind of what you just talked about, where there could be that gap of opportunity for people who have had this stuff growing up, or had the income or whatever ability to have a computer at home. But at the same time, I think it is awesome that I now have a space on campus for, if I have a student who was underprivileged or didn't have the income necessary to be able to pursue their passion. But this was, there's all kinds of people out there who probably want to be in esports, or want to be in content creation, broadcasting, anything that's involved there, right? But they don't have the physical resources to do it. But once they find themselves on this college campus, this is now their home, and these are now their resources to be able to learn and pursue that passion. And so to me, I think that's just one of the beautiful things of having esports at your university. We've talked about that previously, how it's great for the competitive side, right? Yeah. Like recruiting students to play competitively. But I also know there are students who, I've seen it when I was a grad student starting it here, and I see it still when we have students visiting campus. They're not here for esports, but they walk by and they're like,
that's cool.
That's cool, right? Like that's a value add to me on this campus.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I think, the cultivation of I'm going to say K through 12, but it's really middle school through high school. Although, I don't know, Splatoon is making splashes, so that could be something.
It's a fun game.
It is. I play with my daughter. It's a lot of fun. So no knocking to Splatoon. I don't want to be on like a blacklist somewhere. Love the game, but you're hopefully not playing Call of Duty at like third grade. At least in a structured setting like a school. But I'm very interested in the cultivation of a K through 12 or secondary education esports ecosystem, which we already see a burgeoning pool towards. And a lot of times it does get sort of wrapped in with the STEM education, and it's sort of like STEM and esports, and which I have feelings about, like if that's the ticket that we're going to ride to get esports in there, then there we go. But, in terms, I think a lot of times there is this misconception of esports equals STEM major. And I do see trends there, but it's like everybody games, you don't have to necessarily know what the inner workings of a computer is in order to be successful in a game.
I don't have a clue about inner workings of a computer.
I can help you.
It's embarrassing. Like I've gamed my entire life, but people are like, hey, like what specs do you have? And I'm like, I don't know. I bought a pre-built iBuyPower way back in the day. Then I bought my younger brothers from him when he built another one. And that's it. It runs League of Legends good for me. I can do what I need to do, and that's it.
Yeah, I even as an esports director, I can tell you what specs we have in our PC, but
I know how to find it, but I wouldn't have a clue how to describe what they do, right?
But I wanted to address that point that you just made, that everybody games. I tell that to people constantly. When I'm in high schools or I'm talking to university admin or whatever, if you talk to the percentage of high school students K through 12 who go home and play on an iPad, that's gaming. They go home and play on their Xbox or PlayStation, obviously that's gaming, or they go home and play on their computer. You have, I don't know, I don't want to quote a percentage, but you have a high percentage of kids who go home and have access to these games and then have no idea that there's this whole collegiate atmosphere for them to compete in. I mean, with chess and some other mobile games coming into the scene too. Now it's like, what are we missing out on? So I feel like if esports directors and coaches really jumped on that bandwagon and hit that home, we'd have a huge much bigger audience.
It was seriously one of the coolest things for me to see back when, about 4 years ago when the program started. I was a graduate assistant at the time, kind of running and starting it up, and to see just the diversity of students that play together and now know each other on campus. We're a small campus, obviously. I don't remember how big your campus is specifically, but on that small campus, they're likely to know each other. But like, they might not have ever engaged with each other. They might have ever had class, right? So short of, I think the only other thing in my life that I've experienced where there was kind of that diverse offering was I did the musical in high school, and that was the awesomest experience because all the jocks and then all the school, like the nerds like me, and then everything in between were all together for one common outcome. And I see the same thing with esports where I had football players, and then I had nursing majors, and I had people who weren't on any other club or organization in the campus. They were commuters. They didn't have much of an opportunity to connect with the rest of campus. And they were all able to do that under esports was one of the selling points when I was trying to get it here. And then when it was happening, I was like, yes, this is what it's about.
I mean, even now, just I had a signing in our space an hour ago, and it was full of a diverse population that otherwise wouldn't have known each other if it weren't for the program. And that's I said it before, I'll say it again, it's my favorite thing, watching these students interact with each other and form relationships and form bonds that is greater than the game that they're playing.
Yeah, and I think to kind of loop it back to what we were talking about before, I think anybody who's involved in esports, especially at the collegiate level, sees the potential of that like beautiful ecosystem of everyone playing well together and like high-fiving each other. And then you also have the people who maybe they're not the best at the game, but they know the game really well, so they can be in casting and feel that connection in that manner. And then, to loop it back to the DEI space, we still don't see that though, right? We don't see like a pure, just like no majority in it. It's not just, it might be representative of the campus, which is a different, microcosm of whatever the DEI initiatives are on the campuses. But at the end of the day, we have to ask our question. And I like the idea of like the coming to dance thing. I definitely think that the inclusion aspect, the equity aspect is more culture, right? Where diversity is, I would have to think about this more because I haven't really given it much thought, but it's more of a statistic, I would say, right? Is like you kind of look at it and you say, well, what do we have, right? Versus the culture that's producing what we have. And again, I'm not sure if I fully believe in that, but it is something that when you were talking about the, like, you're invited, now come to dance, what kind of sparked in me from that. So, going back to that conversation, I talk about DEI a lot in esports and in other sectors of my professional life. But I also get pulled aside very frequently when I go to the NACE convention or, I'm in person, of usually white male directors who are like, how do I do this? And they're wonderful people, right? They don't have that diverse lens because they are the majority. So they're like, please help me do this thing because I don't know if I'm doing something wrong or whatever. And I really commend people who have that courage to speak for the community that they want because they already love it. Yeah. Right. And they want to see that, but they don't want to be the person who's like getting in their own way. You know what I mean? So I think that there is that we all see the potential of this like beautiful representation within all of our arenas. And, I think the challenge is, do we actually see it? Or is it, is that a potential that we are missing or somehow tripping ourselves up to get towards it? So there's a lot of growth that still needs to be done. I do think that we've, highlighted a lot of things, but right. I talk about this with a lot of my, I'm in a couple of like women in gaming, discords and stuff like that. And we talk about the stuff all the time. But I think we're all past the point of saying this is a problem, right? I've been going to a lot of conferences and they're like, it's a problem in esports. It's a problem in esports. It's like, okay, we get it, right? It's a problem. Now, what are we going to do about it? I do not need to go to another conference where they're like, we see it's a problem. Here are the stats. And that's the end of the presentation. Like, let's go, what's the next step? Establish it. And now let's knock it down. So to build off of that, what do you think might be a good step for a director or a coach or somebody who's struggling with that diversity? Do you have any advice that you might be able to offer for them? Yeah, absolutely. I think part of the hesitation that I'll speak to sort of the women in gaming side of the thing, because I think that's where I have the most visibility. But obviously there are many others that I can't speak for. But, for women, I'll just speak from my own experience. It's daunting, right? Because the reputation. If you're at any level of gameplay that's worth a sand to be like walking into a varsity arena, you've already experienced this, right? That people will be toxic to you simply because you present as a woman, right? And I've had women on my roster who said that they have kind of like a lower voice, so they can almost like pass as a little boy, right? And then they don't get picked on because they can pass. And it's the same type of thing that we see in there's like, if you're just listening to my voice, I think you could, well, maybe, I don't know, like maybe you could tell I'm a woman. And that's something immediately that will be used against me, right? Which is not the case for my male counterpart sitting next to me. And specifically when you're young, and you're trying to like, oh, this is cool. Or like, here's a controller, you play too, because you're over a friend's house and you get introduced to that game. Let's use Overwatch, for example, because you can play that on different platforms and we could throw you a controller, right? And you're like, whoa, this is cool. And I'm feeling engaged and I'm playing with my friend and this is a lot of fun. And then, all of a sudden you, as a young girl, right, you get picked on, right? Versus a young boy who's allowed to make the same mistakes, miss the shot, right? And it's laughable, right? Oh yeah, no problem, dude. Like you'll get it next time. Yeah. If it's a girl, forget it. Every single person is going to be like, go make me a sandwich, right? Go back to the kitchen.
It's so
It's
unfortunate.
toxic. It's
so
very unfortunate.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and no, when you're at that age, let's give it 11, right? When you're 11, there's a high propensity of I am a girl, I am a boy, I am whatever, like whatever your identity is, you start to define that at that time. So if a lot of times, and this happens in computer science too, because I see that with the prospective students being strongly men, that they label this thing, whatever it is, as a boy activity.
Yeah.
Right. And they unplug before they even can get into this ability to be great. Mm-hmm. And usually, and I'm one of the products of this, the women who make it through had a best friend, a brother, whomever, who they would queue up with. Right. And then it's like, don't talk to my sister like that. Or there's an ally, right, who's speaking out and being like, dude, I'll and insert expletives here, right, to posture. Basically, it's a social experiment. So you have usually young men together, right, competing about something. No matter where you are, you could be on the basketball court, whatever. It's going to be like, oh, I mouth off. I got a laugh out of him. That makes me feel good. So I'm going to mouth off again. Right. So there's this sort of culture of men or like little boys, kind of coaching each other, which is where the toxicity comes from. Because there's, if you're playing soccer, right, in the community league, whatever you want to do, and you start mouthing off on the field, the coach is going to snatch that right out of you. Right. That is not going to happen. So, yeah, on a pickup game of basketball up at the park, I might be throwing elbows. I might be saying choice words, right? On the varsity court, there's no way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We are very complex social creatures. We understand what we can do in certain situations, even if it's the same game. So I'm extremely excited for the K through 12 system to come in and just iron this crap out of everybody, because everybody is toxic. But there are certain populations who feel it a lot more than other populations.
Yeah.
The toxicity.
So I would 100%, recommend that any director, whether you're at a community league, at the Boys and Girls Club, or at a university, to make it very, very clear to the entire team what your team culture is. Yeah. Right. And like put that on. We do that all the time on Discord, right? You land in a server and it's like, you can't see anything until you agree to these terms. Right. And, many of us do very much like terms and conditions, kind of like breeze through that if it's really, really long. Right. But living that culture is so, so important, just to display to those marginalized communities, you are safe here. Because if that doesn't even exist, like there's no form of, oh, make me a sandwich, and the like corrective action isn't like, whoa, we don't do that. Mm-hmm. Right. It's not you're kicked off the team. This isn't zero tolerance. It's a learning moment, right? We are a university. You're going to mess up.
Right.
But the important part is that the repetition of that action reduces or goes away. And that's where you start to see that women are like, oh, okay, I'm safe here. Right. I can play here. I'm not going to get berated. Things are going to happen. Right. And even women speak to men in different ways. Sure. When, tensions are high and things happen. But we're very complex social creatures. We can tell when in the heat of the moment, right, someone said something, we can still call them out on it and be like, hey, not comfortable with that. Yeah. Right. And just equipping, especially those people, whether they're men, women, whatever, with, hey, this is what we say. If someone kind of goes off the cuff, feel free on comms, because I can't be on all comms, right? Right. To be like, hey, I'm not comfortable with that, right? Or giving the language of how can we all agree that this is something that we want, right? We want to be a healthy community. I don't think anybody would agree like, no, I want to be toxic. It's like, if you do, then there's the door, right? That's not what we're playing here.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we are in a really great spot as collegiate esports leaders, because that's a pretty pivotal spot in young adults' lives. And going back to kind of your reason for being in higher ed, which is very much a reason that I completely agree with and what drew me to it as well. You know, they're past childhood, right? Like they're past being a kid, but they have so much room and time to learn before they're, you know, obviously 18 is considered an adult, but like so much room until they're like a true adult. I don't know if I'm thinking about that the wrong way, but you know, me at 22, I was still very much a kid. I mean, legally I was adult, but I was very much a kid. I had a lot to learn. I still do. I'm getting old, but I still have a lot to learn. Anyways.
I teach Clay something new every day.
Yeah, you do. And I think that we're in that prime spot of their age of a traditional undergraduate student where we can be able to say, hey, learning experience here, right? Like, as you said, it's not a zero tolerance in that one mistake is costly to your entire, you know, whatever. But we're at that part now where we have to start making that transition to being a productive, supportive, and just positive human being in life, whether that's in esports or in how you interact with people across campus in general. And so I think it's really important that we as esports leaders use collegiate esports as a platform to do that. And so it's refreshing to hear kind of your take there on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Good stuff.
Yeah, so that would definitely be the probably number one thing that I suggest is just making sure that culture is known and upheld, and that there are channels for people to sort of like report. I feel like report is a bad word, but just sort of citizen, you know, like be a good citizen in the space and be like, hey, heard this, wasn't comfortable with it. Just kind of keep your eye on it type of thing.
Almost like here's how we can be better.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, just kind of like landing that as a universal knowledge. Like we all want these things, right? These are the core beliefs that we have, or like the core mission, if you will, of our program. And of course we want to win, right? But we're not going to win if we're incredibly divisive and we're not a good team. Here comes my daughter. Say hi.
Taking a break from Splatoon.
She is. She's home. You know, the other thing that I suggest in terms of just like opening up, because I feel like a lot of times if you have walk-ons on campus or something like that, it can be like, oh, there's the esports arena, you know, and our arena is for varsity players only, you know, for varsity integrity and just the like, I don't want to deal with everybody on campus. But, you know, having like an open house, you know, where people can come in or like bring a friend, and it's very chill. So people can kind of like look around and be like, okay, this is what it looks like. This is kind of what it feels like. And just having those like open communication channels, whether they're on the Discord as a guest, and then they can, you know, maybe there's a channel where they can ask questions anonymously. I don't really know how that works on Discord, but, you know, there's spaces that it can be, you know, open for people outside, whether it's man, woman, anywhere in between, that you're able to get the questions answered about how am I going to be safe here before I sign up and like take that dive. I want to know that it's not going to be a mistake.
Right.
Yeah. So I know we usually keep these to about 40 to 45 minutes long, and I think we've got time for maybe one question, and I can't not ask this question because I'm just curious from my own professional development side. You have obviously been for quite some time now navigating, wearing multiple hats, in that the faculty hat as well as esports. How do you kind of juggle those two? Because in many ways they're two completely different environments, right? You are probably just as familiar as I am as like the traditional faculty life and higher education. It's very, very professional. There's a lot of nuances about it that don't translate, you know, well to esports, and vice versa, right? And then there's the very informal environment of esports at times. How do you kind of maintain that professionalism and juggle both of those roles?
Yeah, so I guess it does help that I am the program director and not a coach. So I do think that but I do, you know, I coach my oldest daughter's basketball team. And, you know, I came up with my parents kind of coaching me, and we still had to like call them coach, you know, on the field. And there are, again, going back to that idea that we are like these complex social creatures. We see this person that I'm, you know, in front of me who's supposed to be an authority figure, but is also my mom.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know, like if she yells at me, I'm going to behave in a certain way and whine and complain. And, you know, versus if that was another kid, you would never do that, right? To your coach, right? Because it's not your mom. So in that way, I do think there is a stride that I go with my students, that there's a clear line of communication. I care about every one of them. They know that. I message them. I you know, we talk about some really important personal life things. So in that way, I do feel like I do have like a coach sort of twinge to me. But I'm not, you know, telling them how to do the gameplay or benching them for certain. I might bench them because they're, you know, a different reason of like, you need to, you know.
We can think of a couple reasons, right?
Yeah, exactly. But at the end of the day, I think part of it is you're putting on your professional hat, and you're expecting them to be professional too. And I think all of our students in undergraduate, they're yearning for this type of growth, right? They want to be their person of who they are, and which includes esports, and they see the legitimacy that I bring to them by treating them like a professional in this space. Right. And they and through that, they feel the sense of value that I know they have, right? And just trying to bring them through that to be like, hey, we can run together. I'm still the boss, you know? And I do pay the bills, so don't piss me off. But at the end of the day, like you can come to me with anything, and you know, whether it's esports related, you know, my mom just got cancer, suicidal ideation, like there are so many things I talk to not just my esports students about, like everything. Students, right? It's students. And to go back to the original point, you know, this is a time in their life that they are encountering such crazy things. You know, they will usually lose the first person to death during their college career, which is crazy.
Financial hardships,
you know, like there's just so much.
We got motion active lights here. They don't like us sitting still for too long. There we go.
There's just so much that they go through. And one of the beautiful things about undergraduate is that there's a whole team of people around you who, when you fall, not if you fall, when you fall, when you fail, when you do this, that, or the other, we're all here wanting to pick you up and coach you through that and say, you can do this. Where when you graduate and you go off to be your independent citizen, grown up self, you know, and you're living in the big city because that's where you got your entry level job, you don't find that, you know, unless you build it yourself, right? And you get your team of people around you, whether that's through esports, right? You're still connected with your boys from the team, and you kind of sync up and you're like, I needed that, right? But that's all that idea of like social and emotional intelligence, which to me is part of that undergraduate exploration. If you're just learning academics, you did it wrong, right? You should be learning about yourself, learning about the ins and outs, like your limits. You know, I had because you know, when you hit that limit, I'm going to be right there, right? To be like, hey, you're okay. Let's just pull it back a little bit. Yeah. Right. And it's designed in a way that's forcing you to push your limits. And, you know, I think that there's, in a way, it's a little cruel, but it's also in a way that's like, you know, we got the safety net under you ready to catch you when we know you're going to fall. But sometimes they don't know they're going to fall. And that, I think, is the scariest part. So if they can get into that methodology of trust and like thinking about the community that is here for them, I think that's one of the biggest things for me as a first year student, is that they don't know, right? They might be from a high school that was huge, right? I'm speaking of like my own high school experience, like a public school, huge public school, right? And you have like your little corner of people, but you don't necessarily know the whole like community structure and that is there for you. And at undergraduate, I want to say, hopefully, if you're at a position that's a good, healthy place for you, you have these people set around you that are looking to help you at any given turn. And that's, you know, one of the things I find to be super rewarding about being a professor is those conversations where students just like walk into my office and they go, I'm like, good start. Let's sit down and like, what do you mean by that? Right.
Yep.
I didn't realize I'd be doing as much. I wouldn't say counseling is the right word, but support that I'm doing with my team or with my program that I have been, especially in these last few weeks where midterms have hit.
Yes.
People are going through their trials and their conflicts. And quite honestly, I did not expect it. I thought people would and I forgot how much I dealt with as a student.
Right.
Yeah.
And then now moving into it, I have to kind of put on the lens of, okay, I understand. I hear you. Let's talk about it, like you said, and work through it. So.
Yeah. I love every second of it, though. Not that they're experiencing these hardships or anything like that, but you get to see that there are so many kids who, for whatever reason growing up or in their life, haven't had a support system, or whether that's because they just didn't feel confident going to them, or they literally didn't have a support system.
Right.
To see the look on their face or kind of the change in their demeanor when they realize, like, this is a safe spot for me to, at least maybe not even dish everything out, but like just say, I'm having a rough day.
Just breathe.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's what I've told my students. I've said, I will always be that person. I'm not going to be the person that has the answers for you. Right. I will direct you to the people that are more equipped to solve those problems.
Right.
But if you have that problem, come to me every single time and we'll work through this. You've got me right there. And I think that's.
If my door's open and my lights are on, I encourage students to come pop in. I have students wander in between classes and just say, hey, Tanner, just checking in. Great. Love it. Love to see it. Thank you. But
yeah. I mean, there's anybody can feel that, right? Just being seen, and it's good to see you, and like feeling that someone meant that when they looked at you and said, I'm so happy to see you today.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think one of us would be like, I don't need that. Yeah. Right. That's such a valuable experience just to be. And especially I think in esports, like that you might have your parents or your support structure who's like confused about why you're doing this. Like, I just yelled at you for 4 years to get off that thing, and now you have a scholarship. Right? I've heard that before. And so, there's this angst of like, well, I should be studying, but here I am gaming, and and just to be like, hey, you're good. And like, you're on the right path. You just just keep making choices about who you are, and you're going to be blazing that path. Yeah, but it's tough.
Yeah. Definitely. I told a student the other day, I was proud of him for getting everything in line, getting some grades picked up and stuff. And I hadn't really seen him smile as much as he did after I said, dude, I'm proud of you. And I think that for him kind of solidified a moment. Like, I'm watching you. For sure. I see you. I'm here to support you, obviously. And, it's just overall creating that safe space is such a big thing for me.
And I think it goes both ways too, because there's so much that I do, for the students, and, like my kids are in the other room, but I'm trying to, I'm always doing something, and for the students to take the time too, to be like, hey, Ruggles, thanks for doing that for us. Like that was, and I've had a lot of alumni, express that to me, because sometimes when you're in it, you don't quite see it.
Yep.
And then when you leave and it's gone, you're like, wow, that was something special, that I had at my fingertips any time of day, right? This beautiful arena, this sense of camaraderie, this safe place for me to go to, someone to talk to, my friends to be around. And, and that's college for a lot of people. So, and when you leave and you move on with your life, I'm sure there are, remnants of that. But at the same time, you're like, whoa, this is different.
Big time.
But that's a shock. Just like it's a shock to go any chapter that you turn, it's new. And, it's, I think some of those first years out of college can be really rough, for a lot of students. But, I think what we can do now to prepare them for their future is only going to serve them tenfold, right? As they move through to the next job, or they're thinking about starting a family, or whatever it is, like whatever their chapter is, they know that deep down they push their limits in college. Like they know it, and they keep kind of pushing it, and they know that they could talk to someone. They know what the quality of that person who they were able to share with, right? I can look for this thing and this thing and people that I trust, and I can take that. And if you leave college with that, that's a big bonus, to be able to, find your own, emotional intelligence enough to see it in somebody else.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I could run through a wall right now, like in a good way. Like I'm so motivated and empowered. This is great.
Let's go.
These podcasts are so revitalizing. I love them.
Professor Ruggles, I want to be cognizant of your time. It is Friday, and
it is Friday.
If your faculty life at this point in the semester is anything like mine, you probably need a nice cup of coffee and get some grading done or something. So so we'll go ahead and wrap things up here. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to every conversation, but this week I was just really excited for this. And so I think there was a lot of great information that you shared with us. So thank you for being here with us.
Super grateful. Thank you again. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate you both.
Yeah. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to episode 8 of Collegiate Esports Experience. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya.